Okay, hello and welcome to potentially the most creative YouTube series that I've thought of, maybe even slightly questionable, but there is good motive and intentions behind it, and hopefully it will be fun to make and also fun for you guys to watch. And and it won't be have loads of FIFA involved either, so that kind of all of you can engage with it whether you like FIFA or not. And the way it's going to work is I've put together a team on FIFA of players whose names correspond to kind of authors' names in the Bible or books of the Bible, and also they can relate to kind of Christian topics, any topics in relation to the Bible or faith or Christianity. And the way it will work is I'll play a game each series with that team, and when I score with a player, I can choose to read a little section from the Bible in relation to that player I scored with, and also in relation to the time I scored the goal with. So for example, if I score with the player Lucas, I can read something from the book of Luke or the book of Acts, because Luke wrote both of those books. And if I scored in, say, the 21st minute, I can read something from, say, Luke or Acts chapter 2 verse 1, or if there's a chapter 21, I can go to chapter 21, and I can choose which section I read from in relation to kind of those verses or chapters. If I score with a player Paulinho, I can read anything that Paul has written in the Bible in relation to the goal time. So if I scored in the 12th minute, I can read from chapter 12 of any of the books that Paul's written, or chapter 1 verse 2 of any of the kind of books he's written. And I will do a short talk about something that relates to the players that I've scored with. And over the course of a match, if I scored 5 goals, I can choose kind of one of those examples of players / goal times to read from the Bible. And the way I've done it is I think almost the whole of the Bible is covered with who I can score with, and then what I can read from. So hopefully it'll be a fun little series. Also, to make it more interesting, I thought that if I lose a game of FIFA, you guys can come up with a forfeit for me to do, which I'll video in time for the next video. But you've got to make it realistic. I won't do it if it's like completely unrealistic. But just, if it's a little kind of fun food eating challenge or a kind of fun exercise related challenge forfeit, I'll record it and I'll add it to the next video kind of at the start of the video or something like that. So I'll also add that element in as well. So the videos will literally involve the game, the short kind of goal highlights from the game, so that won't take up any more than a minute really, and then I'll do a short talk about the Bible passage. So it's going to get me to read Bible passages which I maybe wouldn't usually kind of choose to read from, so they might be more difficult. So hopefully that'll be interesting, and then I'll chuck some forfeits in if I lose and need to do a forfeit. So that's how the series is going to work. Let's jump in with the first game highlights and also the passage which I will be talking about in relation to it. Enjoy.
Right, okay, so here's the team. As you can see at right back, I've got Kyle Walker-Peters. So if I score with him, I have to read something from the book of Peter. John Joe Shelby, I'll read from the book of John. Marcus Rashford, I'll read from the book of Mark. Daniel James, I'll read from either the book of James or something from the book of Daniel. If I score with Pele or any icon, I'll read something of my choice from the Old Testament in relation to the time he scored. Mateus Pereira, I'll read from the book of Matthew. Roberto Carlos, again, I'll read from the Old Testament if I score with him. Paulinho, I can read anything that Paul wrote. Lucas, obviously I can read from the book of Luke. Juan Jesus, I can talk about anything which Jesus said in his life. Gabriel in goal, I can talk about the doctrine of angels if I happen to score with him. Judd represents Jude. Hickey, I'll give my testimony if I score with him. David Abraham, I can read about either David or Abraham. Joel Linton, reading from the book of Joel. Guardiola and Balak again, the Old Testament. This guy's actually called Jesus Corona, so I score with him. I'll talk about things which Jesus has said to give us peace about coronavirus, and a pastor as our manager. There's the team. So into my first game of the series. Didn't get off to the best of starts as I went 1-0 down in the first half, and then in the second half, with my FIFA knowledge, tried to keep Rodrigo on his right foot, but he still scored. I was 2-0 down. I was thinking, oh no, I can't be doing a forfeit in my first Bible FIFA game. But straight from kick-off, nice bit of play with the team, slotted in Marcus Rashford, and that was 2-1. So at this point I was thinking, I'm back in the game, there's hope. I need to get at least one more goal to avoid having to do a forfeit. And then in the 81st minute, get the ball out wide, shoot across goal, and thankfully Daniel James is there for the rebound for an 81st minute goal, which gives us a couple of options for our Bible passage, which I'll explain to you which one I've gone for in a minute. But yeah, final result 2-2, not bad for the first game. Into the Bible passage.
Right, so into the most important section of the video with the Bible passage. So I had a couple of options for what I could look at. I scored with Marcus Rashford in the 63rd minute, so I could look at something to do with Mark chapter 6 verse 3. I also scored with Daniel James in the 81st minute, so I could either look at Daniel chapter 8 verse 1, or I went to the book of James, but the book of James doesn't go beyond up to kind of 8 chapters. And Daniel 8 verse 1, kind of the chapter in Daniel with chapter 8, just talks about this really kind of quite long vision, which would have probably been a lot harder to dig into. So we're going to go with Mark chapter 6 verse 3, and it's quite a random verse on its own. So what we're going to do is we're going to read that little section that it's in, Mark chapter 6 verses 1 to 7, and it's where Jesus is rejected at Nazareth, and it's quite an interesting passage that I've come across before, and I've never really fully understood the meaning of it, so hopefully this will help you and also me to understand what it's trying to say a bit more. And this is how it goes. So it says, he went away from there. So this is Jesus. He went away from where he was before, and he came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judah and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they took offence to him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honour except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could not do mighty works there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marvelled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. And I think the key kind of section in this passage is the concept of Jesus saying that he doesn't have honour in his hometown. I've never really fully understood that passage. You know, some people take it to say that if you kind of go and evangelise and speak about Jesus on the streets in your hometown, you know, people are less likely to listen to you than if you kind of went somewhere else where people don't know you very much. And I had a little look into it, and apparently the kind of the key points with this kind of passage are, one, you know, a sense of kind of envy and jealousy towards Jesus. So Jesus would have grown up with his relatives and those around him and those that lived around him in Nazareth. They'd have seen, you know, they'd have been, well, very aware of the Jesus that was born in a stable with a manger. And now he's kind of gathering this large following, and he's doing these kind of signs and wonders. And it sounds like part of the reason why, you know, Jesus wasn't honoured in his hometown here, and also the fact that people had a lack of faith, is that they might have been partly jealous of Jesus, envious of, you know, well, we grew up with Jesus, we were kind of one of him, we grew up in like a slightly lowly background, and now he's got this large following and doing these signs and wonders, and kind of maybe we're not like doing so much as he is. So there could have been a touch of jealousy there, which if he went into another town and people didn't know of where Jesus came from in his background as much, and they didn't know him as well, there might have been less jealousy, hence why they were more open to Jesus doing miracles there. And also just this sense of familiarity. So, you know, they would have known Jesus a lot more than people in other towns. They'd have got to know him a lot more. And what it kind of spoke to me about is quite often, you know, on a Sunday morning at church, if we're listening to a preach, often it's when a kind of new preacher comes in that people kind of sit up and listen more, because they're less familiar. There can be sometimes almost more expectation of what they might do, and also more faith from us listening in kind of, you know, when they do a response at the end for prayer or healing. Sometimes our faith can be lifted because they're a new face, and we can think, oh, they might be coming to impart something new to us. And I think we just need to be careful, you know, when our kind of regular preachers are preaching every Sunday, to give them the same amount of attention and respect as we would to a new guest speaker that's coming. I think that's sometimes why recently when I've been sharing new videos of you guys, of other people doing talks, you've been saying how helpful you've been finding them, because it's kind of it's a new kind of voice. It can just raise something in us that wants to listen more to the kind of the one that you're used to hearing more often. And I think that's partly what Jesus is saying there, that partly these people would have been jealous of him, and we need to kind of be careful not to be jealous of those around us, our friends. You know, if in a kind of few years' time they're you know in a really well-paid job, or they've got loads of friends or people around them, or they're really popular and we're maybe not so much. So we need to be careful not to be jealous of those around us that might be doing well. We need to be grateful for them and thankful for them, and kind of rejoice with their successes. And also just not become too familiar to the point where we don't listen as much to someone because we know them more and we think we can get away with not listening to them as much, and maybe not having the same amount of faith because we kind of know them all too well. And rather than, you know, when someone new comes in, you think, oh, you know, what are they going to say? What are they going to hear? Let's try and be respectful and as open to what people are going to say, whether we've known them 10 years, 20 years, or whether we've, you know, only just met them for the first time. Okay, thank you for tuning in for the first episode of this series. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found the Bible content helpful. And I'm really open to any ideas and suggestions for how I could make this series better. So feel free to kind of put in the comments any ideas you have of what I could add to the series and make it more engaging for you guys. Yeah, I'd more than welcome those suggestions. So yeah, hopefully see you for the next episode.